Call is now being recorded.
Welcome to Poets in the Pines, a podcast where poetry, storytelling, and creative process intersect. I'm Kelly Miller.
I'm Anne Romallo.
And I'm Leah Cass.
And we're the editors behind Poets in the Pines, an international small press and creative community centered around diverse voices and meaningful work. This is the start of our new author interview series, where we're asking Delirium writers questions about their contributions and uncovering the meaning behind their words. We're so glad you're here with us today, and we hope you enjoy the show. Our guest today is Cypher. Cypher is a self-taught brown and queer now you tell me if I mispronounce anything, okay? Tamiz diaspora poet living in Canada. Her work has been featured in the Dark Winter Literary Magazine, the Ontario Poetry Society, Arcana Poetry Press, the Ophelia Gazette, and several others. Cypher is currently working on her first full-length poetry collection, The Self is an Ocean, which is slated for release in July 2026. Welcome, Cypher!
Hello! Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Oh, yeah. I just introduced you and there was like a round of thunder outside, so that was really cool. So welcome.
Cool. What is the weather, element, what it's called when the weather mirrors your emotions? I forget what it is.
Romanticism.
Wow, so fitting.
With a capital R.
So Cypher's contribution is Dancing in the Embers of Night for Delirium. So Cypher, would you like to read your poem for us?
Sure. Dancing in the embers of night. As my candle flickers, my song carries me. The wind and I become one, our body bending like a cattail. My bedroom is a swamp, mud dripping off my feet. I forget the gazing eyes, for the murky waters call. Beside me, the fish flimsy, the crocodiles curve, and the algae thins to wisps. Together, our spirits leap and thrust, twist and freeze, convulse and release.
That was a great reading.
Thank you.
The poem really came alive in your voice. First of all, I want to hear from you what this poem is about. I took my own meaning from it that we can talk about later, because I'm sure it means different things to different people as we insert ourselves as readers. But for you as a writer, where did this poem come from and what does it all represent for you?
The origin of this one is kind of funny, which is why I was actually very happy that you chose it, because I sent it in thinking you were not going to pick this one. But I was so happy that you did. I wrote it after dancing around to Lady Gaga's Abracadabra in my bedroom. Day after the song released. So I have been listening to, I used to be a really big Lady Gaga fan. I still like her, but I used to be much more into it. So that to me felt like that old sound came back, and I was having a bedroom dance party at 6 a.m. before I went off to class. And and the song is a little ridiculous. And in the best way that Lady Gaga songs can be ridiculous. And so I was picturing myself kind of being the swamp queen, as if I was conducting the elements. So exactly, Kelly. For those of you who can't see, she's doing a dramatic interpretation of what it is that I was doing. And yeah. And so I was kind of wouldn't it be fun to be doing this? And the thing is, as it was happening, the sunlight was slowly coming up, right? Because it was 6 a.m. And so it's quite literally just my imagination of what that was going on. And I think this poem was important to me because I love pieces that are just kind of capturing a moment, because I think so much of poetry, we're exploring something or investigating something. And listen, I do that all the time, and I think a lot of you fellow poets probably do too. But sometimes it's nice to just kind of put a picture frame around a moment. And that's sort of what this is for me.
That's actually surprising, because I was picturing nighttime, almost Victorian in a way. You're carrying the candle up to bed and watching the flickering flame and being mesmerized.
That is so much more interesting than what I was doing because I was in my pajamas in my university dorm room. So you please picture your medieval interpretation instead. You be the
So
author.
I like yours better actually, but what it said to me was kind of getting into the right creative space to let your own mind convulse and release, as you said. And that's such an important process as a writer, is just getting to that spot and having that release. You also mentioned the gazing eyes in the poem, which could be internal eyes, external eyes, but in your own process, how do you escape the gaze and get to the place of release?
You know, I'm so glad you pointed that out because in this case, the gazing eyes was actually me, both me and the audience. Because like I always like to call myself a voyeur's voyeur in the sense of I am watching myself being watched. And so I think, thanks. And so I think that to write in a way that's kind of honest, the thing is for me, I have a lot of self-surveillance going on. That's just kind of the way that I'm used to it. And so I have to make a conscious choice to kind of shut it off. And so I try my best to kind of get into this mindset before I write. I don't always succeed, but I think my best pieces are when I kind of relinquish that sort of control. And I think that the way that I try to do it is something that I realized recently is that I'm less prone to editing as I write when I handwrite compared to my computer because I'm slower.
Yes, yeah.
And so I've recently started being like, my first drafts have to be on paper, even though the computer is more efficient. I'm like, my impulse. There's a Margaret Atwood quote of like, she can't let the reader into the room or else she'll write with her right hand and edit with her left. And that's kind of the way that I feel when I'm writing on the computer. So that's one. And the other thing too is I think about so much of there's a freedom in knowing that nothing I'm saying hasn't been said. There's kind of, I think there's ways to kind of be a little humorist about it if you want. But I think for me, it's like everything I'm saying has been said. Okay, but I can say it in a different way. I can say it in a fresh way. And so because of that, I don't feel any pressure to be like, I am going to be the first person to say this in this exact way. It's like, no, let me just say what I want to say and see where it goes. And I think I remind myself of that whenever I get too caught up in my own headspace.
What a beautiful liberty to give yourself, because I feel like I tied myself to that for so long as a new poet, especially, or even a new writer. Like, I feel like I had everything I said had to be some, you know, huge, universal, like relatable thing, or, you know, like it doesn't have to be some enlightening thing. And I like that you said you could just put a picture frame around it and let it be this moment of you dancing around the room. Though I will say I did not get dancing around the room. Maybe I am the only one, but when I read it, I was like, this is kind of intimate. Like, it's almost like with the convulsing and the releasing, I don't know. I was kind of getting like bedroom vibes from
that sensual energy. You know,
a little bit of sexual energy, but maybe like with yourself.
No, I think, you know, it's funny. I always think of, I love that description that you said, like kind of intimate with yourself, because I think that even more than other art forms, poetry is very intimate because it's about breath, right? You're controlling the reader's or the listener's breath. And so I think that for me, I feel most like myself or closest to myself when I'm writing. And so I think that you're not far off the base in that interpretation of it. I think that these aren't things I consciously thought about, but I'm sure they did seep their way into it, right?
Yeah. The dancing with the flame, almost the, you know, the floppy advertising guy who's like out in the wind, like that kind of dancing, just the convulsive movements. So that came across.
What were you going to say, Leah?
Oh, I was just saying, it's funny because I kept thinking le petit mort, which in French is orgasm, but it means the little death. And to me, I feel like there's so much overlap in the creative process, you know, whenever it comes to the sex is the act of creation, right? And so it's the same kind of energy, in my opinion, that goes through us. But I was really looking at it from a perspective of that act of creation, whatever that was. And you're being stuck in the swamp, but then kind of accessing another part of yourself, a part of the universe, and bringing something through and kind of being the vessel for that as you convulse and release, if that makes sense. And that's kind of how I tied it to like the liminal spaces, the dreams, that sort of thing. And I loved that imagery, but I also tend to write vignettes in myself of like just a moment in time, like that kind of thing. But to me, that was how I interpreted it. It was more of this act of creation in and of itself. kind of being brought through, you know, the swamp, the mud, whatever, and then you're able to kind of like bring it through you and release it. So that I thought that was really beautiful. That was my interpretation as I was reading it.
I'm so glad all three of you like felt so deeply about this. I'm so like honored. Oh my gosh.
We loved it. We're honored you're here. So
Yes.
Thank you.
I
And
have
no, and
never.
agree-
Oh
Sorry.
no, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna add to Leah's point. Like, I agree with you in the sense of like it's a creative, like that energy of creation, if you will. And I'm thinking back on the first time I wrote this, and I think it was during exam season. So I'm sure I was actually seeking this kind of. So for context, this was written in my last term of my engineering degree. So like I had a lot of projects, I had a lot of, you know, all these kinds of things. And engineering, as much as I loved my degree, it's not exactly known for, you know, being poetic. It's very mechanical. It's very, and there is a rigidity I really felt in my studies, and I think that kind of escape that you talk about, that liminal space, I think I feel it often. And even now I work a day job. I often joke that I'm a poet in an engineer's body, you know. And so I think that like that visual that you talked about really applies here. You were gonna say Kelly? You're muted.
Oh, Kelly, you're muted.
Of course, I'm muted. But there's all this artistic energy in you that needed to come out, and you're like channeling that through the page. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say you're an engineer. I did not know this about you, but maybe it shows through in the poem just a little bit in the form. You had very creative use of space.
Yes.
In the poem, and our poor listeners right now can't see it, but it was all over the page, and a lot of the work in here does, which I think gives the whole collection a dreamlike quality. But I wonder what you were after visually with the poem, and what your use of positive and negative space on the page adds to our understanding.
That's an interesting question, Anne. And I think maybe you're right. Maybe that engineering element does bleed into form, because I do think about form quite often. And the visuals of the white space in this, I really wanted it to feel, because for me, whenever I'm, like I said, dancing about in my room, whatever it is, for me, it feels like the room itself is expanding. And so I didn't want left aligned. I didn't want, and more often than not, I think because I'm self-taught, I'm not, all these things are guided by instinct, and a lot of even my editing is guided by instinct. I can tell you if you make me sit with it, but for me, I can just kind of look at something and I'm making a choice and I'm like, is this right? Yes or no? No, and then I guess it's right. And so looking back for me, it's like I actually wanted it to feel like the animals in the swamp. But that's not a conscious thing that I was going through when I was making these choices, right? It's only something that I'm, now that you've asked me, and I'm trying to go back to that version of me that was writing it. Yeah.
My favorite choice was the curve of the crocodiles is literally in parentheses.
Yes,
where it's contained in a curve.
Thank you. I thought that might have been a little cringe, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it anyway, because I haven't seen parentheses that much in poems. And I said, you know what? We're already doing other things. What's one more?
I like parentheticals anyway, but I don't know, you didn't use it as a parenthetical, just a visual device.
Yes.
So much of this poem is so visual.
I'm so happy.
What kind of engineer are you?
Sorry?
What kind of engineer are you?
Industrial.
Okay. Yeah, that's very tactile.
Yes.
Well, I like that you mentioned that the whole experience behind writing this poem was with music, because that was one of my questions, was about, like, in your bio you mentioned that you use a lot of music in your writing process and your writing style, and I was going to ask you, is there a specific song or vibe you lean toward when writing? But it seems like Lady Gaga.
No, that was one example.
So is there something that you pull towards more frequently when you're writing?
You know, it's interesting. I think sonic landscape, I will say that my most listened to genre is probably pop music, but even within pop, it's kind of like pop rock, or like I do some country pop, or like those kinds, like alt pop, that kind of like a pop fusion. And the reason I gravitate towards pop as a core is because it's it's kind on the ears. So I think for me as a writer, am I echoing on someone's, or is that not happening? Okay, it's gone now.
I think
Anyways.
I'm not sure. I think it might be Leah's mic that's echoing. It pops up on yours, but maybe not.
Don't worry about it.
It's okay.
But is it fixed? Yes, I guess so. So for me, I'm also, for context, I did study music for a lot of my life. So I do have and Thummer, my mother tongue, is an extremely musical language. So the way that I write, I wanted to sound good on the ears. And part of that is having a very musical styling. I actually do not love poetry that sounds very, for lack of a better word, clinical. Even though a lot of contemporary poetry, because you're free from the constraints of meter and rhyme and things like that, it can veer that way, and that's stylistic. I don't love that. And similarly, pop music is meant to be catchy. It's meant to be spread, right? And so I think that there's those kinds of sensibilities that I really gravitate towards. And the reason that I like things that are a little bit on the edge of pop is because I'm like, okay, you have this core. How do you blend it with something that's a bit more niche? So how do you blend it with, I don't know, metal aesthetics? How do you blend it with more punk aesthetics? And so that kind of, that Pareto rule of 80% familiar, 20% unique is where I'm really, that's okay. I think I just really,
it's also using kind of the form, right? You're you want to experience it, but in multiple forms.
Yes.
How do they use the same methods? Pop music for me is a lot about the writing too.
Yes.
I mean, the big pop divas, they all have incredible songwriting skills.
Yes.
And like you said, there's a lot of meter and rhyme, which we have lost kind of the art of. It can get quite, I don't know, I guess maybe free is an ironic term. Because free verse is kind of an ironic term, but yeah, it can get quite mechanical. And I don't read that from your poems at all. They're very musical.
Thank you.
And so much movement. And I love your use of form and your use of the page.
Thank you.
And imagery. I mean, gosh, the swamp imagery was something that I hadn't really realized I needed. But as soon as I read it, I was like, okay, we have to have this in there. There's no if, ands, or buts about it.
Thank you.
We all really loved it.
Yeah, thank you. And speaking of music, I mean, because you mentioned, you talked about artists, I can mention some of my faves. Maybe that'll give a landscape.
Yeah, sure.
Preference. My favorite artists of all time are BTS and Halsey, those two. Other than that, I would say I listen to Sunday 1994, which is an indie Christian goth rock band, but they're not actually Christian. They use those aesthetics. I like a lot of Rina Sawayama, who does pop metal. Some Epic High, who's a Korean hip hop group. There's a range, but I think at the end of the day, the binding forces are catchy melodies and really strong songwriting.
So then I guess my next question is, what do you look for in a poet then? What do you look for that you love in a favorite poet?
A favorite poet, I think for me, I forget who said this, but the thesis statement of poetry that I remember reading somewhere was that it's to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar, right? Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that that phrase has percolated in my mind a lot, and what I think that really means is that who does that best? Outside of poets, who do you think does that best? It's a child. A child is the person that can make the strange familiar and the familiar strange. And so I think that people who still retain that childlike naivete or awe or whatever it is, that carries through in their writing, and that's the kind of people that I want to read. Because I'm I want you to reintroduce the world to me. I want you to introduce myself to me, Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's not necessarily there are elements that I like. For example, I like writing that's very philosophical. I like writing that's very musical, autobiographical, all these things. But at the end of the day, if there's not that kind of, if you don't approach the world as if it were a question mark, I don't really want to read what you say,
Also, there's those types of, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because right before this, I was scrolling through Instagram, and it was there was this sharing of a poem that a kid had wrote, and it was I was going to write a poem, but it got lost in my house, but now it's wandering around my house. It was an award-winning poem that a child had wrote, and I thought, there is something about, there is something we lose. I think as we get into adulthood, I don't know what it is. I think lately there's been a whimsy revival. Maybe it's whimsy, but also wonder. I think, and maybe the restriction of once you learn a lot about poetry, I feel like it's kind of a double-edged sword, because then you know all the rules and you're like, it's like you're thinking about it too much. But kids, they just, and good writers, they just put it out there in a way that you can understand it, and in a new and unique way.
Yeah, and the thing you talked about with the rules is so interesting. Like there's this I'll try and translate it from Thummer, but there's this kind of thing of like rules are like a straw. It's useful in the sense of like while you're trying to drink up the lessons, this is hard to translate, it's useful. But ideally, once it's done, you throw it out. Like once you've learned and mastered it, you don't need it. And that's the point where you go back from like, it's like all instinct, and then it's like kind of that middle ground where you're like teetering between instinct and skill and like learned techniques, and then it goes back to instinct again. And so I think that in between period is kind of when a lot of us really struggle, because we don't really know where to position ourselves, you know?
Yeah, they say you have to know the rules in order to break them.
Yes, yes.
And maybe when you know them minimally, you break them badly.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, exactly. That's it. I think that's exactly it.
Yeah. I want to go back really quick to this 80-20 rule. And
Yes.
how do you think that applies to dreams?
Oh, that's so interesting.
Familiar versus new.
Back to the theme, I see. Okay. You know, dreams or delirium? I think I have a different answer for both.
Oh. Which one do you want to hear?
Let's do dreams.
Let's do dreams. Okay. Because I think the theme was delirium. That's why I brought it up there. But dreams, you know, it's so interesting. Like they say you cannot see a face that you cannot imagine a face or dream up a face in a dream. It's got to be someone you've already seen. And so I think so much of the basis of our imagination, like humans are creatures of patterns. I think that, you know, at the end of the day, we can push the boundaries, sure, but nothing we do is truly unprecedented or unthinkable. And I don't think that's a bad thing. But I think that, you know, there is more in similarities in these kinds of things than we expect. And so for me, there's a big comfort in that. And so even when I dream of something strange and very peculiar, I know that peculiarity in some degree is a very shared experience. So I'm like, sure, maybe 80% of the world will think I'm weird, but 20% I'm sure will have very comparable experiences to me, right? And so there's
the best we can hope for.
Exactly. Right. And so like I think when it comes to that 80-20 rule, it's like at the end of the day, it's usually used in finance or like any kind of business, right? It's like 80%, your profit comes from 20%. And I think that balance in terms of dreams is so interesting, because it's like that liminal space, if you will, that kind of like extra 20% is what I really think you have to like hone in on and figure out like what makes you different, what makes you alive, what makes you think. And then remembering the fact that the majority of what you think and feel is very much a shared experience.
Right. Maybe that's the golden ratio.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm just using Pareto rule because we
right. It's all as it is.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It was a pleasure to have you here. How else can we find you, and what work do you have coming up that you'd like us to pay attention to?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I'm mostly active on Instagram. It's at cypherspace_101. And my debut full-length collection, The Self as an Ocean, comes out in July this year. I'm very, very excited about it. The cover is gorgeous. I commissioned my friend. She did a fantastic job. And yeah, keep up to date.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you a bit about it. It's actually a poetic memoir is the way that I've been describing it. So I got a very interesting, I'm turning 25 this weekend. I've had a very interesting 25 years. You know, like most things that my dad loves to say that I've lived a life and like an entire life in my 20-something years of existence. And so I think that because of that, I perhaps have some insight to offer. And I wrote it in a way that I think the reader can really insert themselves into the persona and the speaker. And it kind of becomes this like first person navigation experience. And so I think that if you're someone who's ever wanted to either, I don't want to talk too much about relatability. I think that as a selling point is not super strong, but you want to imagine what it is like to have experiences of, you know, having lived in 24 different places, not because it was fun, but because it was because of poverty, or because growing up with a nonverbal brother, or like being in a cult, or like queerness, or all these kinds of things that you kind of think of perhaps solely from imagination. If you'd like to kind of self-insert as an opportunity, I think you might enjoy the book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it
It was
sounds
great
amazing.
talking
I
to
can't
you.
wait to read it.
Thank
I can't wait
you.
to either. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. It was great to see you again, and
Yes.
hopefully we'll chat again soon.
I would love to.
Yes, thank
right.
you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Cypher. Bye.
Bye.
I'm gonna run up really quick and grab a different plug cord